Good afternoon, everybody. So, welcome to our webinar series for organisations. I'm Kerry Howard, and today I'm going to talk to you about how we can look at addressing psychosocial challenges in the workplace. So, I understand that a lot of you will be in that HR management role in your organisation, or at least that's a large sort of proportion of the people who I know registered for today. But it might just be very helpful to us. We're live streaming this through LinkedIn and also through some of the other channels, Facebook, Twitter, whichever way you're seeing it. It would be really great if you want to put into the comments below whether or not you're watching this live, and if you're watching live, where you're watching from, and just to give me a little bit of an idea about, who's here, where you're located, and maybe even what sort of role you have. So whether you're in that HR management space, or if you're part of, the general management of the organization, or you're the business owner, whichever kind of role you're actually here today, trying to gather some more information, right? Because I think that would be really helpful to know whether or not we've got primarily HR managers here, or whether or not we've primarily got business owners or the general managers, just as a bit of a helpful. So if you wouldn't mind putting in some comments below just to help me understand that. And what I'll do as we go is just kind of, we'll address some of those challenges. There'll be opportunity for questions later on. And if you're watching this later as a replay, still please go in and put in the comments that you're watching it as a replay, but what your role in the organisation is, because it helps us to work out how to address that information for you. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Deb. So in Hobart, so finance, HR and admin. Jack of all trades, Deb, you're doing it all. That's fantastic. So, hey, Vicky. So based in Canberra, so the product and development manager, that's fantastic. Another user is just watching live, who is the business owner. So welcome everybody, and making sure that I just want to make sure that we address everything. So along the way, if there are any comments that you want to make or questions about things that I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to go through the initial part of the presentation, and then I'll give you an opportunity to come back in, and we're going to check in on whether or not the information's kind of what you were expecting. But if there's anything in particular that you're hoping to find out, please just put that in the chat as well. Now, I've got Vit in the background actually helping me out. Vit actually looks after our small to medium enterprises and helps us with that sort of business development side of things. So Vit may also be, chatting with people at different points. Okay, so fantastic. All right, let's get on with it. And let me just sort of talk to you about, what we're here to talk about, which is the psychosocial challenges in the workplace. And I wanted to just help people to understand what some of them might be, and just at a very sort of broad level, because we only have 45 minutes, just to give you some idea about what it is that what we're talking about. So as I said, I've already done my welcome. Thank you very much. But why are we even talking about it? Prior to COVID, we actually used to talk about the fact that 1 in 5 Australians would experience a mental health condition. But post-COVID, we're actually getting reports of 4 in 5 Australians actually talking about the fact that they're feeling that they have some negative impact on their mental health now. Now, I think COVID's done a fantastic thing for us in terms of helping us to understand what the problem actually is, and the fact that we've started to openly talk in the community about the fact that we do have mental health challenges, which is kind of normal, because actually we all do at different points in our lives. But the fact that we're now talking openly about it, and we're able to talk about the fact that, most people during COVID have experienced some negative, emotional kind of stuff that they've had to try and work out how to process. So they're then showing up in your organization. So when we've had various points of lockdown down the southeastern states, then, we're going back into the work environment. We're noticing that people might be experiencing higher levels of anxiety, and that will show up in different ways depending on the person. They could get cranky, they could be short tempered, they could just seem to be irritable, they could be upset and afraid to try or do new things. And so I just think it's important to have a look at what are the things that we need to understand and what are the things that we should be looking for. All right, so enter Omicron. I don't know about anybody else, but see, I just think of the word and I think it's like a transformer. So I kind of go, here we go, just when we're about to feel like we're comfortable to get back to work and do things, here we have a problem again with a new variant. I do laughingly say I wish human beings were as adaptive to their environment as viruses are, because then we would all adjust to things much quicker and be able to get on with things. However, with the new variant, what I want you to start understanding is that it kind of gets people into a place where they're almost resetting this feeling that says, oh, I thought we were okay and we're not really there yet. And I talk about the fact that it's like a false start in a race. And when we kind of, we had the original sort of variant of COVID-19, then we saw a lot of stuff this year with Delta. Now we've got a new strain. What happens is it's like taking off from the starting blocks and then finding you've got a false start, you've got to go back and start again. Now, each time we successfully go back and start again, research shows that we get slower. And so it's one of the things that I want you to just kind of understand, each layering effect. And it's just because we think we're over it, we think it's safe to go back out into the workplace. Uh-oh, here's another thing. And so we start to get a bit panicky again. So we just have to try and understand that that's a very normal part of what's going to happen. So it is, as a result of all of these things, now your responsibility as the employer or HR people, the employer's representative, to be responsible for your employees' psychological injuries. And so big part of the problem is that a lot of HR managers are saying to me, but Kerry, I really don't feel like I've got the right skills to do this. And I think that that's a really important element to that, right? So this part of what I'm trying to give you here is that high level overview of the sorts of things that you need to stop and consider. It is not going to cover off on everything, but because it is your responsibility, it is something that you need to really start taking seriously. So who am I to talk to you about this stuff? I was once written up as the most influential woman in mental health in Australia. I think there are lots of people who might have influence in different areas, but I've recently been appointed as the Wellbeing Australia as their mental health advisor, and Wellbeing Australia provide a lot of support to our frontline and emergency services workers. So it's lovely to be able to do some stuff with them, and it's really about trying to look at things a little bit differently, about things that we traditionally think that we can do, and the way that we approach things. Often, we think that we can't fix things, and actually we can. There's lots of things that we can do. And part of what I want to try and get through in these webinar series is giving you more information about the things that you actually can do. So let's get on with it. Some of you may have heard of this thing which is called the 70-20-10 model. It's a knowledge transfer model that says whenever you deliver any kind of training within an organisation, that what you're actually going to be doing is 10% of it needs to be formal training, somebody like me going in and delivering a training program specifically. 20% of it is then going to be through mentoring, so the senior managers in an organisation helping the younger people, or their junior people, not necessarily younger, their junior people understand what they need to do as part of their job. And then 70% is actually online, like in the job, on the job training. Now, when we start talking about building up psychosocial awareness, or mental health, well-being, whatever which way we want to talk about it, what we have to understand is that the big part of this transfer is 70% is going to actually come from the work environment. Now, if your work environment has not traditionally had a really good sort of focus on psychosocial awareness, or I'll talk a bit later about managers and their mental health literacy. But if there isn't a great deal of mental health literacy or comfort talking about it, or even comfort in open communication and talking about things openly about what happens in people's lives, you are not going to get that 70% transfer on the job. And so part of where I talk about building resilience in your organization is actually about trying to build within the organization the elements for that 70%, so that then going forward, your organization actually has on the ground that knowledge already there. And so that on the job training bit actually is something that you're going to need to build into the organization over the coming years, right? So, and that's what I'm here trying to do, is to help you build that organizational awareness, and then hopefully in a way that will bring it in, so that then in future years you do actually have that on the job component to the knowledge transfer, because it's really quite important. All right, so I said to you I would talk to you about a few different areas. The first one was about flexible work and people wanting to, post-COVID in particular, renegotiate what their working arrangements look like. Now, I say to people, one of the things that we just have to be conscious of is that sometimes as employers, or sometimes as, the person who runs the business, we've had this idea that, well, this is the way we've always done it, so it's the way that we should do it. And that COVID was a temporary blip in all of that. But as soon as that's no longer a blip, we want it to go back to the way that it was. And what we're seeing is a lot of resistance from people about that. And I've talked to multiple different people at different levels of organizations in varying industry sectors, and the same thing comes up all the time. But I just want it to go back to the way that it was. But we can't. The environment has completely changed, and that actually means that people are going to ask for justification about why something isn't allowed to, be approved. Now, flexible work arrangements get a little bit tricky. Everybody kind of goes, well, I work from home during COVID or whatever. I mean, some people didn't, some industries, they just stopped, right? But if you were working from home, or your organization was able to immediately go to delivering services from home, then when it comes back time to go back into the office, most people are kind of meeting with a bit of resistance about, oh, well, I don't want to be there full time, or I want to spend, I really like being able to work at home in my pajamas. Fair enough. I mean, we've all got used to wearing our stretchy pants, but it's not actually like, so having it one way or the other, you cannot be rigid anymore. You're really going to have to look at the grey area. So, 5 working days in the week, if that's the case, people who go, oh, I work better from home, so I'm just going to work from home full time from here on in. That's not really effective either, because there's a couple of things that happen when you come into the work environment. You're talking to each other, you get a chance to catch up on things, you get a chance to talk to your colleagues about ideas or thoughts or areas of, common work that you don't get to do if you're actually just working online from home and sending people messages. So the importance of at some point being able to kind of have that connection is something that you do need to build into it. But the other thing is that people who are working in cities and things who moved away, there is also that sort of, well, I don't want to do the big commute anymore, and, health-wise and all of those sorts of things. So the flexibility really has to be there about how we communicate, how we actually make sure that we've open to having a conversation, and that when we come up with the rationale for why it's okay or it's not okay, that it actually is a reasonable rationale, and we're not just drawing our, line in the sand because that's the way that we want it. I remember talking to one organization earlier this year about, oh, but what if the board members walk through, well, and they think that nobody's here? Well, see, that's not really a reason to enforce that everybody should actually be in the office all day, every day. The board members should also be informed or understand that the world has changed. And so just the appearance of is not really going to fly with a whole bunch of people who've now decided that there is a whole lot more to life than just working. And if they can get their work done in a condensed period of time, and they don't necessarily have to go through all of the motions, including stressing out trying to get to work and get kids to school and do all of these other things, how much flexibility do you actually have within your organization to allow at least meeting halfway? Now, what's the big challenge in how we do that? It's actually about how we communicate. So it's about trying to negotiate a change. And in negotiating the change, you actually have to be able to look at, well, what's the real outcome that you're looking for in terms of, what's their obligations to be, is it in the office? I mean, if you've got public facing spaces that need somebody to be there in case a client's walking in the door, well, of course, you're going to need somebody to manage that. But you might find that we can mix it up a little bit. And this is where a lot of people, when we talk about, you may have heard the term, the great resignation. When we talk about those sorts of things, the great resignation is there because people have decided actually there's a bit more to life than just fronting, getting on the train for an hour and a half every day to go into work and then do the same coming home again, when that is valuable time that I could probably be online working and spend time, with my family or doing other things. So I think it's just a really important thing. How do we negotiate it? How do we keep the communication lines open? And I always say, when somebody says they want to discuss their flexible work arrangements, it really is, and you can make a simple pro forma, or like, especially in the HR areas, where you ask them to assess, well, what their previous COVID sort of, attendance was like, and what they were doing, and what their job role stuff is, and what they're proposing as the alternative, and trying to work out how you meet in the middle somewhere. Now, the other thing to do with that is just checking in with your workers' compensation insurer, because, and I'm not a legal representative, so I'm not going to put the whole legal perspective on it, although at some point I would probably like an answer to all of this. Pre-COVID, if you had somebody working from home, you actually had a legal responsibility for their workstation set up. And then with COVID, there was a lot of stuff. And I find it interesting because a lot of people have been able to claim on their tax, like their employees, but they had to do a home office setup because of COVID. So they've been able to then claim that on their tax. So part of my brain goes, if it's able to be claimed on the individual's tax return, then surely that setup becomes their responsibility. The one part of the government saying it's okay for them to have that home office set up and it's a legitimate expense of their work. On the other hand, I know that pre-COVID there was a particular case with Telstra where a staff member had an accident. She was actually sick, and this is on the public record. You can go and find the case, but she was actually sick, but she'd logged into work online on the computer, but then fell down the stairs. Now, in falling down the stairs, in the end, it was found that Telstra were liable for that. And so my brain kind of goes, post-COVID, I don't know what the situation is. I know that when COVID first hit, I was encouraging lots of people to make sure that they send out to their staff a home kind of workstation setup, check-in, just so that they had something on record that said that they'd checked that the workstation was set up properly. But then I've talked to other organizations and they go, oh, yeah, but who pays for that, right? If somebody wants to work from home and they're working on a home-based computer, like their own computer, or do you have to then provide them with a computer? So these are all of the things that I don't really believe that there are cut and dry answers to. I think the ability to be open and communicative at least then gives us an idea about somewhere in the middle, but making sure that there is an agreement about what's happening in terms of the workers' compensation elements to it, because if they are working from home, there is liability that's still there on you as the business owner. All right, so an important one, but I don't want you to use that as the only reason that we kind of shut the whole thing down, because I think people will be. I talked to a recruiting agent, a good friend of mine, her name's Jill Holden, and she actually said that since COVID, pre-COVID, when you would be looking, somebody was looking for a new job, they're going, oh, I want a new job because I want more money and I want more recognition for what I do. But post-COVID, they want more flexible work arrangements, they want support for their mental health, and they want to work for a sustainable organisation. And a lot of people are saying they only want to work 4 days a week. And so we really have to look at, these things are changing in our culture, and we have to be able to, change with them, really. All right. So I said, how do we actually help you to provide constructive feedback? Because this is one of the things that a lot of people have sort of said, particularly with young people, when they're trying to give them constructive feedback, it's actually related to their job role, that they've found it very difficult, that people get really upset. And look, this is going to happen when people are stressed. So coming back in post-COVID, you would have noticed some of these things where people were kind of like, or they get angry, or they're, throwing a tantrum and seemingly walking out the door. These are all common things that we notice when people are quite anxious. And so you may recall, and even, recently I was in Sydney, and like noticing that the mask, the checking in, we've got to pull out our vaccination certificates and stuff before you can walk into any kind of public place, shops and all these things. All of that actually just puts you on a state of hyper arousal. And so when you're looking out, you're making sure that you've washed your hands, you use sanitizer, whatever you're doing, and you're keeping your distance, and you're doing, our whole sense of alert actually rises. So it's no surprise then that when those people are then coming into the workplace, that they're maybe already a little bit heightened, and then anything that they might have normally been okay or receptive to, all of a sudden they've got crankier, or they've, flying off the handle, or they're out of there and they're walking out the door. And you may have noticed that there's a bit more sensitivity, or they don't seem to be as capable for that. So one of the easiest ways is to provide the constructive feedback by calling out the elephant in the room, like letting people know that you're aware that, these things might happen. People might be feeling a bit more agitated, whatever, that we can do that. But also then the constructive feedback is received much better if it's sandwiched in between some positive stuff. So, and we quite frankly call this the shit sandwich. Okay, it's the positive stuff. It's the, I really appreciate the fact that you're here, and this has been great, and you've done this really well. We need to talk about blah, 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 and put the negative stuff in between, because this is the impact that it's having. And then on the end of it, you want to bring it back around to another positive, to sort of say, you really appreciate the fact that this person's been open to the feedback, and, you notice that that's a part of, how they approach things, their willingness to try and learn and improve. And, even if you only throw that on the end, even if it might be a bit of a, reach at this point, because this person may not have been able to receive feedback very well, it at least sets a framework for you to know that if you've got to give out some sort of negative stuff, if you surround it nicely with positive stuff, what that person hears is the positive. And in a psychological space, we talk about this as the primacy and recency effect. So primacy is the first bit. I'm hearing the good stuff first up. The recency is the end bit. I'm hearing good stuff at the end. And in the middle, we're talking about the stuff that I need to improve on and how I can improve on it. So constructive feedback, looking at that positive, negative, positive, right? Really useful tool, and really simple. People can accept it much easier. Now, the other thing I want you to kind of think about that is the setting of the scene. Okay, so why, like when we're getting somebody in, they can already be on edge and feel that they're being judged, and they can feel that, certain people, if they want to give you some feedback about somebody else in the organization, they're there with their judgment hat on. So they're unreasonable, they're being mean, this person's rude, abrupt, whatever. Now, when we come into any situation and we're already got our judgy pants on, right, I want you to think about it like a wall, that it means that that's then kind of like, you can't get past that wall, that, that judgment bit that comes up is sitting there like a defense mechanism, that's almost like a shield, and all of these things that you're trying to kind of get through is going to just deflect right off. So we have to kind of bring that person down out of their high tower of judgment and looking down, and try and get them down to a level where we're on the same playing field. And part of that can be about looking at some open questioning about why they might feel that way. because we have to kind of set the scene for what we're here for. We have to try and get any kind of defensiveness down and settled down before we start talking openly about things. And actually validating a person's experience is one of the quickest ways to get them down from that space into more of a recognition space. So somebody comes to you to tell you about something that happened with somebody else, and they're all up in that kind of judgy, this one did this and that and the other thing. You're trying to calm them down. Validating the perspective, right? You don't have to agree with what they're saying. You just need to validate how they feel. So I'm sorry you feel that way. I want to understand that a bit more. Oh, that must be difficult for you, right? Those sorts of things will help to bring that person right down, because they're actually going, this person's listening to me, instead of actually getting reactive about the judgment. So that's a useful tool. I talk about in my latest book, which is called The Trouble with Trauma, and I'll show you that at the end, but that's this one here. I talk about our self-management system, and it's actually a framework that I've constructed to help people understand themselves, because in understanding ourselves, we can then help to manage our interactions with others. It helps us when we understand that self-management system. We can put ourselves in the framework. Even when we're in conflict with other people, we can actually put them in the framework as well, and we can see where the differences are coming from and how we get into this space. And that then means that we can work out how to get out of it. Okay, so when we've got that child protector mode, that's where the emotion and the aggression and the anger or the upset comes from, that emotional expression. But if we want them to get their rational thinking, work the problem solving stuff out, we need to get them into that rational kind of format at the top. So I talk about that a lot more in the book, but I also do that with teams and things when we're doing training. One of the things to just kind of think about going forward. So I talked about we needed to understand how we could improve engagement. So a lot of people post-COVID are saying, the lights are on, but nobody's home. People are turning up to work. They're not necessarily engaging in the same way. They're spending a lot of time talking to colleagues about, their stressy sort of things, but they're not actually able to sort of get in and focus. And so part of improving that engagement, I find, is almost like giving the team a bit of a round robin. If you notice that it's something that's happening quite regularly, I would have a morning session with all team members where, you, depending on the size of the team, right? But you give them, like, they've got 2 minutes basically. And I have done this in organizations where I use an egg timer. So you give them a couple of minutes where they get to rant about whatever happened on their weekend or last night, or whoever upset the child this morning, or the cat, or the whatever. And then that's okay, cool, we've kind of blown it off, blow off steam bit, and cool, now we're going to get on with it. And what do we need to do from here, team? Let's get moving, let's get and clear on what it is that people are expected to do with that time and that that day and the time that they've got to commit to the work with you. So that usually finds that people kind of then become more present and more connected with what they're here to do, and they've kind of blown off what's been outside, and it helps to kind of separate it a little bit more and leave it at the door. Not that it ever really gets left at the door. But the other thing that's really useful, and I always say to people, sorry is not an admission of liability, right? It's an acknowledgement of the other person's pain. So when we've got somebody who's talking about an issue, sometimes just saying sorry that must be awful for you, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, is something that then kind of gives that person somebody actually acknowledged the difficulties that I was having. They'll know, in fact, most of it, because as Australians, we tend to go, oh, it's not your fault, right? But it's still this awareness that you're acknowledging that would have been a difficult thing for them. And it's one of the quickest ways to kind of get people to, go, oh, I don't have to keep on about this problem, because they go on and on and on and on and on about a particular problem because they don't feel validated and they don't feel anybody's heard them. And so the way that we can quickly nip that in the bud is when we hear them and we acknowledge their pain, and then we ask them, is there anything that we can do to support or help? And then they're usually like, no, I'm all good, and off they go. So it's really simple, but I could guarantee you that if we got better understanding about the fact that sorry is just the acknowledgement of the pain, I think we'd have a lot less legal problems in this world, really. All right. Then how do we lift the energy? So lifting the energy in the room, and for those of you who may have seen it, and I'm just going to give you one quick demo today. I'll push back the chair. I've demonstrated this before on Facebook and different places, but if we really want to lift the energy, I'm just going to have to tilt this up a bit while I do it. If we really want to lift the energy, we can laughingly get everybody into a situation in which they're going to do the Wonder Woman pose in the morning, right? And it sounds silly, but if you do this with the pen between your teeth, okay, that actually activates muscle memories in your face. And this stance actually helps to make your whole muscle memory feel like you are actually more, in charge on the job, more powerful. It kind of brings up this really sort of strong affirmative energy that we get just from standing this way, right? So often if I'm going to talk to a group, then I will do a few different things and move myself around and, often kind of click my fingers. I'm trying to bring the energy up because we actually vibrate our emotions in energy. So, and you can feel it because if you walk into a place where everybody's happy and having a good time, you get that lighthearted feeling. You know what I mean when you hear the kids in the playground at a school, right? And they're running around and they're having fun and they're making noise and they're having a good time and they're calling out to each other. There is actually a lightness about that because it's not heavy and weighed down by the woes of the world, right? But the other side of it is when it is weighed down by the woes of the world, you kind of walk into certain office environments and you're like, I don't want to be here. So how do we lift the energy? And a big part of that, couple of different things that we can do, but it's about trying to inject at least some fun, even in the midst of, chaotic times. That can sometimes be about, chat. Different work environments might do things like, they get together and they do a quiz, or, they'll have a creative kind of time after lunch where everybody comes back in and at 2:00 we spend a bit of time just, throwing ideas around or whatever. Afternoon tea, morning tea, getting together for lunch, doing different things that kind of say that we can actually do things and enjoy each other's company and not just be here for, an ongoing kind of drony, work environment. So part of that is about the ability to connect. So when we connect, and we can use different work environments, like we might use chat groups or we use different things, but the ability to connect and to maintain a connection between people who work together in a way that feels supported is actually really important. And it gives you an opportunity to do that internal kind of pulse check. I always say you're never going to know exactly what's going on with everybody, but if we've got a way of doing an internal pulse check with our people, it at least gives us an idea about where that heart rate is sitting for everybody. You'll know then if there's something going on in the organization because people will be open and more supportive to talking to each other about it. So connecting and providing ways for people to connect are really important. The other thing is encouraging people to connect to our bodies, because when we don't connect to our bodies, and things like this is why things like yoga and those sorts of practices are really helpful. Taking 5 minutes to just kind of have that mindfulness thing will get you back in touch with your body. The reason that it's important to connect with our body is because we can't change what we can't feel. And we're actually taught as children not to feel. And read the book if you want to understand all of that, but it is a really big deal. We teach our children not to feel, and so what we have to do is try and encourage people to reconnect into their bodies to know what they are feeling so that they can actually work out a way to express what they're feeling. And it's a really, it seems like a really simple thing, but it makes a really big difference too. All right, so supporting the vulnerable. Right. So I talked earlier about mental health literacy for managers. There's some research that came out recently from the Black Dog Institute. They talk about the fact that, we can assess mental health literacy in your management team, and we can give you a good indication about what's the likely indicator that you're going to end up with a psychosocial problem based on the mental health literacy of your management team. So that's a really interesting thing to do. And I would encourage you to look at doing that as part of your, leadership development program is to try and look at, well, what is the current mental health literacy of your management team, and what would you like to do to improve it? Because I think it's a really important thing, especially at this point in time. All right. To support people, though, that we know have challenges because they've disclosed them, or we're aware different things have happened. If somebody is going through a relationship breakdown, that is going to have an impact on them. So if we hear that somebody's separated that we're working with, we just have an awareness that says, maybe they're not going to be on top of their game at their best at this point in time. So the awareness then of where they're at means that we can focus on the process if there's something that's going wrong, not focus on the person. And so that's a really important point to make, because often what happens is we just kind of go, we start negatively viewing the whole person rather than just negatively viewing what they've done, where they may have made a mistake or something. So, we'll talk about Jenny being off her game, or Jenny's always making mistakes, as opposed to, Jenny must have, have been having a hard time because there's a couple of errors in this spreadsheet kind of stuff. So that's the sort of way I want you to try and think about encouraging your people to be speaking with more awareness, right? And not using the problem as, something that is a negative about that person as a whole. It's just the problem. All right. What about for you? What about you when you're there looking after your people? How do you look after yourself in all of that? And part of this can be about looking for somebody independent to listen to you. The other thing I'm going to say is, the exercise part of it. And, I don't want you to groan and kind of go, exercise. But one of the things, and I'm not just talking about going to the gym, right? I'm talking about a walk after work, right, is often an opportunity for you to mentally process the stress of your day and get that kind of out of your system, right? So that's the part of this that is really quite important, is getting that off and getting an opportunity when you walk, especially if you walk and talk. So if you're there with the kids or whatever, because it's a really good way to find out what's going on for your kids and to help to reduce their stress levels, is actually by taking them for a walk and asking them how their day was. You get much more information in that while they're walking or cycling or doing what we call bilateral stimulation than you will if you just sit down and have a coffee with somebody. And in fact, if you walk and talk it, as opposed to just having the coffee with your girlfriends over the things that you're really annoyed about, then, or the guys, instead of just sitting there over a beer, and yes, I'm using gender stereotypes, instead of doing it that way, if we walk and talk instead, we get an opportunity to actually process through the things that are bothering us because of the bilateral stimulation and how that works on our memory network. Too long to explain, just trust me, it works. All right. So stress management requires a plan, okay? You, as the HR people who are, in your organization modeling how we manage things and do things well, stress management, you have to have a plan about how you manage your stress, right? Don't just assume that we're just going to kind of cop it sweet. We have to learn, how do we manage it? What works for us? And what works for me is not going to be the same as what works for you. And you might have 10 people in your office and you ask them about what works for them to de-stress. You'll get 10 different answers. So it's not about, here's the stress plan and we're putting it in and you're all going to do this. It's kind of like, okay, do you have a plan though? Like, we know we've got a tender coming up and we know that we've got this really kind of tight time frame. We know that we're going to have to manage stress. Now, yes, getting together for a beer at the end of the week after it's all said and done, that's good. And it helps to kind of break the tension, but you don't want to only have alcohol as a reliable source for managing stress. It actually causes all sorts of other health issues, right? Okay, so identifying trauma, whether it's personal or in the workplace. You'll know if there's an injury that's happened in the workplace, somebody's had a traumatic experience, depending on your industry, that could be anything many and varied. Construction, they could witness somebody else who had an accident that was a physiological, like a physical thing. So that will have a secondary vicarious trauma impact. So understanding these things is really important. Understanding that if somebody is bullied and harassed in the workplace and you're observing it and you feel like you're powerless to do anything about it, that's also going to have a secondary impact. And so this is the thing that we also have to recognize as the HR manager is looked to by a lot of the organization as the person, the go-to for I'm not feeling good and let's go and talk to that person. You're not the therapist. If you have an EAP provider, please refer them out to an EAP provider or encourage them to go and find a counselor or a therapist. I'm not going to say psychologist because there's not enough of us and you can't get in to see people. It's just, this is a big part of the reason why I'm saying I'm trying to help organizations for you to help yourselves, because there aren't enough of us out here to try and fix the problem once it's been created. It's much better for us to fix the problem before, like to fix it so it doesn't happen. Okay, so that requires a multi-stage framework. So I talk about promotion, prevention, and early intervention. I'm just going to say, forget the last one. From a psychological perspective, the early intervention is the EAP person. It's the person that you send them off to afterwards, right? It's not that the organization can do stuff around promotion. It can talk about understanding mental health, the fact that we support it, the fact that we're trying to kind of, help everybody to help themselves. But prevention is the biggest part of it. And that's when we know there's a problem and we've got 4 weeks from the time that we're aware that there's a problem before it would get to the point where it would then be considered a disorder. And that's actually the prevention space. A lot of people think it's beforehand, but it's not. So being able to intervene early to help people when you know there's obviously been a problem. Had a call a couple of weeks ago and a staff member had a family tragedy, major event. Of course it was going to affect that person's work. And the employer was like, we really want to support them, but kind of don't know what to do. And when they come back into the work environment, you don't know what to say, or, and so this is common. It's like when people have a death in the family, somebody gets ill, like we kind of avoid it because as human beings, we just don't know what to say or do about it. And yet there are many things that we can do. And so giving you a bit more insight into what are the sorts of things that you can do takes longer than 45 minutes today, and I'm already running out of time. So as I said, early intervention, way too late. But at the very least, if you've got some EAP or referral pathway, really important. The ability to recover from anything is much better if we can recover at work. Now, 3 keys to being able to recover at work is about the awareness of what the problem is and the fact that we're aware that they've got it, and we provide them that validation for the situation that they're in, and we give them a sense of purpose for still being there and coming to work and being engaged. And that is actually much better to have them recovering at work than it is to just kind of leave them to their own devices because we're not sure what to do about all of that. And it, again, just requires a lot of communication. All right. So I want you to just, because we're coming to the end of all of this, what's one thing, could you please put in the comments, what is one thing that you have found valuable from what I've just told you about today? And, something that's been, if it's not been helpful, I'd like to hear whether or not, there's an area for a reason why it hasn't been helpful. And I'm going to have a bit of a glass of water here and wait for you to tell me what that one thing was that you might take out of today that you could implement straight away in your organization. Everybody's gone very, very quiet. A reminder to look after ourselves. Absolutely. And I think that that's a really important thing, because you, as HR managers in particular, you're here because you really want to help others. And that's why you've gone into this as a career path. But we do. Therapists do it too. We forget about making sure that we're helping ourselves. yes, the HR company counselor can be exhausting, Chantel, and let's face it, it isn't your job. And so it's trying to work out some other ways to support people. And it's not that you don't care, but if you take on everybody's burdens and you fall over, guess what? The organization's going to be in a much worse space, right? So really important. Okay, so Lauren says the validating somebody's feelings or views on something which is having an impact on them. Absolutely, because we all appreciate that, right? It doesn't matter whether you agree with me or not. Okay, but if I'm telling you that something's upsetting me, at the very least, if somebody says, "Oh, well, I can understand why that would be really, why you would feel that way," right? They don't have to agree with me. They're just sitting there, kind of going, "Oh, yeah, I see you." And I hear you, and I'm sorry that that's causing you pain. And it really does make a really simple and direct connection. That person will just think you're the best thing since sliced bread. And Leonie talking about checking in regularly. Absolutely. The pulse check is really simple, actually, and it just doesn't seem to be, something that we do because you will constantly hear, and especially this is driven from the person who, wants to get the work done, that, we got too much to do to get together and do those things. But people are much more productive when they have an opportunity to kind of like, it's like shirking off the stuff that we brought in from here. And then it's kind of like, okay, right, now let's focus. Awesome. All right. Oh, the 4-week time frame for prevention. Absolutely, Melissa. I mean, it is very important, and it's something that people don't realize, that if the sooner that we intervene, and in fact, within the first 6 hours is ideal. The sooner that we intervene, we acknowledge, we validate, the less likely we are to cause a traumatic injury. So in fact, even in big traumas, if we can intervene in the first 6 hours, we can prevent PTSD from developing. So understanding that sooner rather than later is a really valuable thing and reason why, quite important. All right, let me just take you through a couple of little things. I've just put up some new training for HR managers specifically. This is absolutely just focusing on everything that I've talked about today, but in much more more detail, more practical sort of stuff, giving you some information. If you would like to go, we're just putting the link up for people who want to go and register for that. And basically, depending on demand, we'll probably end up running a few different groups. We can run these online. If you've got a large enough organization, we can do these sorts of things in-house for you as well. Just depends on whether or not borders are open. But there's a lot of things that we actually can do. And there is that link that's just come up on the screen for you. So that's about expanding on everything that I've talked about today, but in more detail with some practical kind of stuff, and giving you even, some handout things that you can use. So understanding that's only a half day. And if there's further things that you think you would like from today, or something that you would want, you think needs a bit more time and attention, please just drop us a line and let us know. Put a comment below about something else that you would like to get some training on. I'm really trying to make sure that we deliver what it is that you need. I don't know exactly what that is. Sometimes coming at it from my perspective, it's kind of like, oh, that's obvious to me. But when we talk to organizations, there's a lot of oh, I don't know how to do this or that. So practical training, skills transfer is also still really useful in this space. Then looking at building resilience in your people. So I'm just we need to move that slide back again so that we can see. Look at that, that's better. So that mental muscle method for teams, that's another way that I've done things with organizations where we're trying to build resilience. So depending on your organization, your industry, sector, you might be finding what I said about, young people. You've got lots of young people in your organization, and you're finding that that's part of the challenge, is the resilience building. It's also looking at recruitment stuff and some of the things that you might want to look at for your recruitment side of things too. So just keep all that in mind. But when we have resilient staff, we get improved flexibility, we get an enhanced focus, we get that mental sort of strength that they've built up, so their ability to work through and problem solve things, and we end up with a sense of increased endurance. So they're able to, put in stuff when they need to put stuff in really kind of quickly, and they're able to then turn around and, flexibly adapt to new things that come in the work environment. So resilient employees is absolutely what we're trying to get to for everybody, right? And they're not naturally resilient. In case you haven't seen it, the psychological injury prevention on score, there's a scorecard where you can go and assess your organizational psychological injury risk. It's a big mouthful. So looking at, and really as HR managers, you're in an ideal position to be able to do this, or if you are a business owner and you know what your sort of stats are around your human resources, go in and have a look at it. It actually covers off on 5 different areas. So there are 5 key areas that we look at under your scorecard. And there are reasons why we focus on 5 areas in particular. This is a recent report by the Black Dog Institute looking at modern work, and they've identified that there are 5 key areas for business. Now, I had the scorecard done a year and a half ago, but they've just brought out this report that's given all the validation research that says, hey, I was on the money in the first place. So they say train your leaders, which is where we talk about our people. So in the scorecard, I talk about our people. You'll notice that some of the blog posts and things that I put out where I talk about our people, why we focus on that, is about training your leaders. HR and HR resources and HR management policies and procedures and how we do that. It's about how we empower people, because we're actually giving them a framework they know that's reliable and consistent. And we just need to make sure that it's applied consistently as well. Intervening early, what they say, that's where I talk about prevention. What are the sorts of things that you're doing in your workplace when you know that there's trouble brewing, and how do you intervene early to nip those things in the bud and work the problem through? That's the prevention activities. Then what they talk about prevention is really they're focusing on change management. And that's where I've said to a lot of organizations, if you don't manage change effectively, that's the highest risk for psychological injury that we see across the board. So people don't like change, right? And COVID did a lot of change for them that they didn't like and didn't want. And then we want to go back, and after a while we meet resistance because it feels like it's another change, even though we're going back to the way that it was. So change management, even if you've already decided as the business owner that you want to do something, you at least need to go and talk to them about what it is that you want to do and why, and get their input, even if you've already made the decision, because your ability to engage them at that point goes up tenfold, right? But if they feel like you didn't even consult them, and that's an area that they look after, they get really kind of cranky, and they'll, usually resent anything that kind of comes their way. Transition is what they talk about in the report. That's where we talk about agility. It's about the things that you do within your organization where we adapt and adjust to things because our environment changes very quickly. And as we get new technology and improvements and those things, where do we go? All right, my challenge to you for 2022, beautiful people, is how do you create a psychologically healthy workplace in 2022? Right? Because it does a whole bunch of positive things for your organization by having a psychologically healthy workplace. It just means that people want to not only come and work for you, but they want to turn up every day and they want to make the best contribution they possibly can, because they know that you value them and you'll support them if they're not having a great day. Because guess what? We all have days that we don't have great days, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't have an off day every now and then. Remember, please, 4 in 5 report psychological distress from COVID-19. It could be me, it could be you, it could be your boss, it could be my PA, it could be the offsite staff, it could be my peers, it could be stakeholders and colleagues. We don't know, but a big part of it is our willingness to be prepared to support people no matter what their circumstances are, means that they're more likely to want to tell us what's going on and make us aware of stuff. And trust me, you get a lot more when you actually understand what's going on for your people. All right. Now, if you want to know more, My book, The Trouble with Trauma, I showed it to you before. Here again. Or that one. The book is available in print, ebook, and audiobook. And I authored the audiobook myself. So trust me, it's me talking like I am to you now in the audiobook. So just if you head to thetroublewithtrauma.com, you'll see the intro video and things that I did about the book. But you can also just go to the main website and have a look in the products and services under books. So I have run over time as per usual. So any questions or anything in particular that anybody wanted me to answer right now. Alternatively, please, if you just put them in the comments, and after this broadcast, we can actually then try and look at addressing those for you. So don't feel like just because we're about to finish up that's all going to disappear on you. There will still be opportunity afterwards. All right. And if you want any more information from me, that's where you'll find me, kerryhoward.com.au. You'll also see sometimes you might get emails from more at kerryannhoward.com. Just depends. International, in Australia, not that it really matters. They all go the same place. It's where you find me. And anything else that you sort of might like to hear going forward. So these webinars will be run once a month. And from next year, we're actually going to try and focus a little bit on the resources sector, because one of the things that I do know about the mining community and the resources sector is that they are aware that they have a big problem, but they're not really doing a whole lot about improving it. And I think it's a bit the same as the emergency services sector, where for a long time they're aware that they just, like, these things happen and they don't realize that there are things that we could do to help each other. So no problem. And Chantel, you're most welcome. So no problem. I'm glad that it's helpful. No, thank you, Dr. Terry. No problem. Great information. I appreciate that feedback. And if there's anything else that you would like to get information about specifically, please just put in the comments below, or send us an email, or reach out through the website. And I will hopefully see you soon.